Hello, and welcome to Stories Sustain Us, the podcast where we share stories of those working to make a positive impact on our world. I'm your host, Stephen Shower, and today we're diving into a conversation that intertwines personal loss, professional growth, and the power of community. My guest, Ari Simon, is a trailblazer in climate justice and a compassionate advocate for navigating grief in our lives and workplaces. Ari's journey begins with an early fascination with cities and takes us through pivotal moments, including the life-altering impact of 9/11, personal loss during college, and finding identity and purpose in Los Angeles. From these experiences, Ari has cultivated a profound understanding of grief, how it shapes us individually and collectively, how it's tied to our environmental challenges, and how it can inspire resilience and connection. Whether through their professional focus on climate justice, their work creating safe spaces for grief in organizations, or their insights into eco-anxiety, Ari reminds us of the importance of honoring our shared humanity. Let me tell you a bit more about Ari before we get into this genuinely personal conversation about the power and purpose of grief and loss. Ari Simon is a facilitator, community engagement specialist, climate policy convener, grief guide, leadership coach, and spiritual care practitioner. Ari's work equips people, organizations, and communities to recognize loss as a gateway for transformation rather than a liability. Their landmark program, Grief at Work, brings grief honoring and loss competent approaches to workplaces, policies, and programs, particularly for people working to address the climate crisis. Ari weaves a background in climate policy, planning, and management with a training in contemplative care, coaching, and end-of-life loss and support. They apply navigating loss and change to a myriad of personal, professional, and policy realms, from one-on-one coaching to grief school classes and workplace trainings to government agencies. Ari's work is centered in Southern California and has reached thousands of participants across North America, moving leaders, communities, and teams forward on issues such as climate action and adaptation, mental health and well-being, queerness and gender inclusivity, and grief and loss. This episode is a heartfelt exploration of how loss, when acknowledged and embraced, can transform communities, foster healing, and inspire meaningful action. So settle in for an enlightening and deeply moving conversation with Ari Simon as we uncover the intersections of grief, sustainability, and hope for a loving future. Here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. All right, well, Ari, welcome to Stories Sustain Us. Thank you so much for taking time to join me and talk with me a little bit about your story and some of the work that you're doing. I've been eagerly waiting a chance to speak with you, so thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
And as I mentioned in the introduction of you, I came across your work in a Natural Resources Defense Council article from earlier this year, and can't wait to dive into that and get into some of your work. But let's dive into your life first. So if you don't mind, giving us your life story. Where did you grow up, and how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, so I am originally from New Jersey, though parents, grandparents, even some great-grandparents, all from New York and New York City. And so that really feels almost in some ways like like an ancestral home. I can't say I have all, I don't, it's hard to sort of trace my connections to what's now Poland and Ukraine and, what was Prussia. New York is kind of where I come back and root in my right, yes, this is the place that I know best. But I've been living in Southern California now for 16 years. And really kind of came originally to do my undergrad in urban planning and public policy. And so I think what was really fun is even though I grew up with kind of New York as my concept of a city, and I loved cities growing up so much. I was so fascinated by them, especially New York. But then I got to learn this whole world of planning and policy and land and like even sort of ecology from this kind of California perspective, from this especially LA and Southern California perspective, that just really in some ways expanded my imagination, also made me have to sort of wrestle with maybe things I thought were the right way, or,
Sure.
that actually there's kind of no right way. And yeah. And so, when I first kind of came to Los Angeles, I was really excited about downtown LA in particular, because I really wanted that kind of dense urban center kind of life. I didn't even realize that was possible in LA.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm really grateful for about downtown Los Angeles is that it's kind of just this. It's like a petri dish of some of the greatest sort of urban challenges of the 21st century. And so, really, just getting to dive in and having it be my job on some level to sort of just know everybody's everything and really look at like, how do we address the issues that come up in this place was kind of this amazing experience in my 20s, that then I think along the way, and especially in more recent years, I've like looked back on that time and just realized how much loss was kind of this underlying thing, of so many of the issues happening there. But somehow in my work at City Hall and a lot of my work in the communities, like I never felt equipped to have that conversation. We definitely didn't talk about it in our workplace. Yeah, it was just kind of this elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Can I back you up a little bit in time to maybe understand a
Yeah.
little bit more about your journey from New Jersey to LA? So, you're in, middle school, high school over there on the East Coast. What was that like for you as a kid growing up there? You said you were always kind of fascinated by cities. Like what was that childhood draw to that urban environment, or that
Mhm.
that interest in urban planning and city? Where did that start for you?
Yeah. So I have an aunt who's like my second mother, and she lived in New York City. And so I would spend weekends in the city all the time. My dad also commuted into New York City, and um, yeah, so many of my earliest childhood memories are like walking around her neighborhood in the Upper West Side and walking
Yeah.
through Central Park and taking the subway. And um, it was just so stimulating. And it was kind of outside of my sort of New Jersey suburb. It was like where I got to see lifing. Just I loved going to the Met. I loved just like, yeah, the art and people. And it was the 90s. So it was like roller skaters in Central Park. And um, yeah. And when I was a kid, I had lots of different, very sort of nerdy pastimes. And one was that I would draw this map.
Yeah.
It was a totally imaginary, fictitious place. And I would take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and I would draw like a city grid. So there'd be some streets, some buildings, cars, parking lots, subway stations, whatever. And then I'd finish that one 8.5 by 11. I'd flip it over. I'd tape another piece to it, and it just got longer and longer and longer
Yeah.
until I still have it in my garage here at the house. And
Awesome.
I can't even hold it. And it's in many pieces. And, but it's, at one time in late elementary school, we stretched it out around my entire elementary school. And I think
Wow.
it was probably over a half a mile long. Um, so I think, my map and visiting cities and places was like, I guess my map and the drawing practice
Yeah.
is how I made sense of the world. So
Okay.
if I would go to different places or I saw, and I look back in my, I was doing this map from age 6 till maybe 11. And so it's very it's just my silly kind of imaginative regurgitation of what I was seeing, right? There's
Sure.
sprawling shopping centers and there's some skyscrapers and it's like this kind of chaotic mess of things. But I already was very concerned with like what forms made sense next to each other. That like, okay, this place is going to have a lot of density and this place is going to have more farms. This place has a lot of like Targets and Starbuckses and,
Yeah.
like,
So you were already envisioning
so yeah,
the practical as well as the aesthetic. You were kind of putting those pieces together already.
yeah, I
That's a
clearly
that's wonderful.
was.
Yeah, that's
It's
wonderful.
just kind of a sponge, and then this was my way of, kind of getting it out and making it sort of my own, or having my own
Sure,
personal kind of
making sense
connection
of it.
to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
that's wonderful. That I appreciate. Thank you for sharing the
yeah,
story. Yeah, that helps me kind
yeah.
of see the early formations of where you moved on to later in life. So you stopped doing this around 11, you said. Did you transition into something else that kind of kept that spirit of urban
Mm.
planning in cities alive, or did you do like most teenagers and you were like a teenager and you moved on to exploring other things? So
Yeah, I think 11 was really a sort of creative blockage point.
mm,
Um, a lot shifted. That was a really big year of shift in my life.
mm,
I'm really aging myself, but or in the reverse. But when I was 11 when September 11th
9/11
happened.
happened. Sure,
Um,
sure, sure, sure.
and I think just that time period was so like the kind of collective end of innocence. I
Sure,
feel like was my literal like 11-year-old also end of innocence.
sure.
And so yeah, I was kind of a lonely middle schooler, and by high school found my way to making sort of more friendships and social connections. But I think I always felt really different during that time, and just, yeah, was kind of probably thirsting for something else that I didn't know how to name or how to ask for,
Sure.
that just felt like it had more depth, had more kind of, yeah, I was always sort of searching for the deeper meaning in things.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that was like not a cool or normative thing to do or be like as a middle schooler or high schooler. And so, yeah, I kind of just tried my best to go with the flow. But yeah, it was like, and then I think was sort of felt like I could explore like music or art, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't be the artist. I couldn't
Mm,
be make
that
I could appreciate it,
that creative
but I
blockage
had to
was
have some
real.
distance.
Yeah.
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 That makes more sense to me when because that choice of words that your creativity was blocked by 9/11.
Yeah, and
That's
just,
and then
like being
just
a being a middle schooler, being like
yeah, just
overweight, not cool, just like dealing with other
yeah,
kids, not knowing my place in the world. Yeah.
yeah. I can appreciate that. I mean, my younger years, I was a soccer player. That's kind of where I maybe expressed my creativity was on the field. But the idea of being an artist or writing poetry, I kind of did that quietly on the side. I didn't let anybody know that that's what I did until much later in life as an adult. Because yeah, it was just kind of hard for me to address some of those things with the young mind that was just trying to make sense of the world. So yeah, I can appreciate that you're part of your story. So how did you
Yeah. Well, and I
decide?
feel like
Oh,
that's I was going to say that's such
yeah,
a key
please.
piece of getting me to like Los Angeles in some way too,
That's
right?
what I was
Is
going to
that
ask. How did that happen?
right? So my said aunt who lived in New York moved to Southern California. So I
Okay.
started going out there every summer and just loved it. Loved the palm trees and the just, yeah, I think I kind of caught the California bug. But I think once I was there, it was almost like I finally had this place where I could bring these sort of abstract ideas or things that I tended to very by myself or alone, and could
Sure.
actually start kind of exploring and experimenting with, whether that be kind of learning about, different kinds of urban planning forms and seeing them in action in all these different ways around LA, to being in a community of like artists and writers and creatives, and seeing myself as like not separate from that and getting to explore that. And
Right on.
yeah, it also really allowed my own sense of identity to flourish as a queer person. And
Yeah.
just, yeah, really, like, I mean, it feels so cliche, but just kind of, there was like, I grew up with a lot of like sort of Northeast liberal elite kind of values, that, are have a lot of ideas about what belongs on the shelf, what doesn't, what's the successful things to be, what are not,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the world that I got to just kind of dive into in LA was just really rejecting that model, and really, or like messing with it in other ways. And yeah, that felt so, I think, just like exciting, kind of like a breath of fresh air. And it really helped me feel like I could start to figure out like who the hell I am and what I'm
Sure.
doing with this life.
Sure. Sounds like you're describing to me like a liberating experience, kind of finding yourself and finding some freedom in that. So I don't know if I'm putting words to it that you're not meaning, but that's what I'm interpreting from what you're sharing. So where did you end up going to school then? Was it USC, UCLA, or what did you end up
Yep,
doing? Yeah.
got it. I was an undergrad at USC.
Yeah.
And yeah, I will be polite
You
and
don't
say
have
that
to
I
be.
had a great college experience. I could talk for hours in a very critical way of USC, but my overall experience there was a really good one because of how kind of challenging and dynamic it was.
Mm.
And so kind of a pivotal piece of that is that, so my sophomore year of college, my best friend and roommate died in a car accident. And our other best friend, who's still a dear friend of mine, was his girlfriend at the time. And they were like, they lovers from first sight. And
Yeah.
she was, driving, and it was just a horrific accident. And so, I think before that, I spent my freshman year just being a really excited 18-year-old, 19-year-old on this campus, and being involved in tons of stuff and getting involved in like environmental, sustainability stuff on campus. And I think my sophomore year already, I was struggling of just being like, wait, what is LA? Why am I here? Why can't I walk the kind of places that my friends who are going to school in New York are doing? Or like, wait, this is, why did I choose a school like USC when I'm so much more interested in like the liberal arts? And
Yeah.
and so then I think when my best friend and roommate died, it just like really was such a big shift to really be like, oh, what really matters? Like what really matters, and seeing just how much actually like community matters, and how life is really short and precious. And I think honestly, that was like it was almost a big coming out experience. I don't think I've ever described it that way before, but it just really was like, it wasn't like I necessarily changed my sexuality label, but I all of a sudden was just like, as someone who was assigned male at birth, like and was still identifying as a man at that point. I just kind of gave myself permission to like date other men and experience things that I don't know if I would have really let myself experience if I hadn't had that kind of like really coming to a head kind of tragedy of like how unpredictable life can be.
Yeah.
And the other piece I'll speak to about it, because I do feel like it's really relevant to what I do with my work now, is that um, I also just saw how little to no support me and my community got from the university.
Yeah.
And at the
And
time, I
just for clarity,
I
I'm
didn't
following you.
know.
The queer community. I want to make sure I'm
Oh
catching
no, I'm just
what community
sorry. Yeah,
are we referencing, so I can make sure that I'm following you. What support you didn't get?
sorry. In the wake of my of this death of my roommate and friend, that those of us who were affected by this
Just
loss,
your community of
um,
friends, right?
yeah,
Okay.
that just
Thanks for
yeah,
clarifying that. I wanted to make sure I was following your story.
totally. We just so did not receive the kind of care, support, etc.
Mm,
that I think anyone going through that on a college campus deserves. Anyone
sure.
going through that kind of anywhere deserves.
Sure.
And um, but at the time, I was 20 years old, and I had no idea. Like, we don't know what we don't know, and
Right.
I
Right.
didn't even know like what I could have asked for, or how to advocate for myself, or um, and I think that has really shaped just so much about how I kind of see the world. And that, like, yeah, that just this was like not okay. And
Yeah.
actually, we deserved way better. And especially, it's, you know, I was at an extremely well funded university with lots of resources, and, you know, one of the top ranked social work programs in the United States. So, of all places, like, it's not like the resources weren't there or procurable. It just, you know, it's just that idea that, like, I don't know, our systems and institutions still so often don't know what the hell to do when loss arises and when grief enters the chat.
Yeah. Yeah. So how then did you start to evolve your career? I mean, that does sound like it's such a pivotal and powerful part of your life story, and I'm my deepest condolences for the loss of your friend. But clearly, that was also a pivot point in your life where that has kind of tracked along with you. It seems like in your career. So, from this 20-year-old figuring life out and not knowing what you don't know to your career path, how did that sense of the significance of grief and being having safe places to talk about it, identify it, name it, speak about it, like how did that kind of follow you in the ensuing years until you get to where you are now, that's kind of what you're really trying to help others understand?
Yeah. I feel like I love the way you described it, as if it, like, has this been this kind of thread that's always been with me or following me. Because yeah, you know, for a lot of years, I wouldn't have been able to even name how much it
Sure.
impacted me.
Sure.
Because I spent a lot of my 20s, you know, always finding my own ways to, like, resist and be my own weirdo, but, like, also following suit. I still wanted the job at City Hall on some level. I still wanted to, like, be at all the public events and galas and be at the community meetings. And that's really how I kind of linked my self-worth for most of my
Sure.
20s. And so um, I think it's what shifted is then just a lot of kind of aha moments that I'd say started in kind of 2017, 18, maybe
Okay.
even earlier a little bit. Um, I'd say I'd say in 2016, just so many of the people in my orbit were starting to get really engaged in the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, um, that summer just brought a lot of particularly horrific deaths at the hands of police violence. And this was 4 years before George Floyd, but, you know,
Sure.
Philando Castile and others, and Eric Garner had just been the year before that. And so I think there was like this, that kind of was a big opening of like, oh right, there's like so much and I'm working for the city, and there's this tension
Yeah.
of
What
right.
were you
Like
doing for the city at the time?
I worked for a city council member running a field office for downtown LA. So
Okay.
kind of everything constituent services, everything kind of troubleshooting and being out in the community for downtown LA was like me and my team's purview.
Yeah.
And so I'd say like getting sort of a little more politically thoughtful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then really just, I'd say, kind of having a pretty difficult experience working at the city where, the politician I was working for was like not a very trustable human being. He is now awaiting his prison sentence. Which I didn't know the degree to which like that was going on at the time because it was very
Sure.
shielded from us. But like I can look back and be like, yeah, of course, this is like a really corrupt system. And I think just starting to then, after I left City Hall, my first big project was working on LA County's countywide sustainability plan. And I started kind of just everything started shifting around 2018. I worked with an amazing life coach. I was starting to sort of deepen my practice in Zen Buddhism and doing meditation a lot more. I moved to a little cabin in the woods with my ex-partner. Still kept my place in LA, but was like just starting to really shift like what mattered most to me. And I think starting to do climate work and then getting to like directly work with these community-based organizations and nonprofits that are really on the front lines of climate justice was like this another door opening of like another piece of the puzzle revealed to me of like, oh, right. Like when we're doing climate policy work, loss is just like one layer deep rather than maybe in other policy arenas, it's like 4 or 5 or 6 layers deep.
I like the way you described that. I think I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, cool. We're getting to get into some like existential shit together of like, like, oh, like what are the ramifications of land use and the ways that they have caused major harm on people's lives about where power plants and oil extraction and all these kinds of things happen, or where freeways are put and how that affects air quality for, and like all of a sudden it was like, right. And it was like, I could feel how much my heart was sort of coming back online. It was like, yep, you love this. You love being able to like have these kind of deep personal conversations. And I loved that at my work at City Hall too. It was my favorite part. My favorite part was just getting to show up with community members and like make them feel heard. And troubleshoot and use this language of policy and planning to try to sort of bring some, answers or actions to the table.
Trying to help. Right.
And then, that kind of but 2018 and 19 was this very sort of like, I couldn't have even told you at the time what was happening, but I also started doing some hospice volunteering in my new town I lived in, which I still live in. And and then in 2019, my cousin Tess died, riding her bike to work in San Francisco. And that was such a pivotal moment for me because I got to show up in the Bay and see how her community mourned that loss and grieved. And that both looked like the most like beautiful memorial service I've ever been to, that just totally stretched my imagination of like how we can memorialize in a way that really looks like someone's life, honors their life, rather than this kind of prescriptive top-down kind of ways that I'd always seen it growing up. And her communities and like all of the different communities that she was a part of organized so quickly and took so much action and like took to the streets, literally. I mean, and before she died, there were no separated bike lanes in the Soma and even most of the Mission neighborhoods in San Francisco. Basically, anything south of Market Street. And Mayor at the time, London Breed, even named Tess by name when then the city agreed that they would put in separated bike
They
lanes.
needed to do that, yeah.
And so I think I just had this, like, I'd already seen it again in like the Black Lives Matter movement. I'd already seen it in these couple places. I'd already seen it in climate justice, but then really to just see it in my own life and in my own extended family and just see the ways that, like, right, when we actually tend to grieving on a shared community level, like shit can transform. There is really, this is a very potent vehicle for action. And I just, again, it was another, my heart was like, yep, like this is what matters to me. This is what I'm here for. So, yeah, I got like a little lovely arts grant based in LA to do a extracurricular convening called Queering Death, where I decided I really wanted to get people together to learn and talk about the intersections between death, dying, and grief, and queer identity and LGBTQ lives and history. And by crazy coincidence, our first day of what was supposed to be our in-person cohort was March 13th, 2020.
Ooh, what happened that day? I don't remember.
What happened around then?
Wow.
History lesson for anyone listening far into the future.
Yes.
That's the day that we plunged into lockdown for COVID-19.
Everything shut down, yes.
And so all of a sudden I was like doing some more kind of consulting work in the climate planning world at the time, but losing some of my contracts due to COVID. But all of a sudden I just had a coaching practice and this incredibly just amazing community container that I was getting the honor to facilitate, where we were really just directly like, the intention was to be learning together, but really, I mean, we were just, my God, we were just kind of holding each other's hands through March, April, May, and June.
Each other up, absolutely, yeah.
So, that's kind of the journey that really was the universe kicking me in the butt. That was like, this is it. Like, keep going.
Nice. Well, thank you for telling that story of how you got from, the little kid drawing maps and creating cities in New Jersey suburbs of New York to who you are today, helping people with grief workshops and in your organization, your program Grief at Work. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and then we can probably sprinkle in discussions around kind of what spurred this conversation, climate anxiety, eco anxiety, and just the significance of naming and honoring grief so that we can be more resilient. I love the tie because it's real. It's my personal experience. I can appreciate. That's why I've been so eager to speak with you, because I want to absorb some of your knowledge as well. So what is Grief at Work? What is it, and what do folks need to know about it?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I would say Grief at Work is kind of my primary offering, which is really sort of in some ways it's almost more of a modality than anything else that I use about how I show up when I do consulting and facilitation work with workplaces and teams and communities, which kind of sometimes that looks like staff trainings. Sometimes that looks like one-off workshops, or even like a retreat. And sometimes that actually just looks like a sort of loss honoring grief informed planning process or strategic planning process. But either way, it's really getting to this sort of what I believe is reality. And thankfully I have a lot of, thought partners and other people who agree that that our only way forward is to really let loss and grief stop being so taboo and just accept it as sort of part of the conditions of what make us a human,
Right.
and what can actually really bring us together and connect us and move us forward, rather than it being some liability, that it's actually something that we can move towards with each other, that has all kinds of, healthy benefits.
Yeah. Well, so tell me a little bit about what it is then that if someone, hires you to do a one-off workshop or maybe something more extensive with their staff, like, what are some of the things that you do to help folks starting? I guess let me back up 1 second before I get to that question, because I think what I'm thinking right now is, in my own journey, I'm I'm coming up on 19 years sober and have worked for a lot of these last 2 decades on uh, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, like
Mm.
learning how to feel my emotions. Right, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to have a human experience. I just didn't know how to process that, which is why alcohol and was such a great thing for a little while in my life, because it shut down the brain and shut down the higher functions, and those kind of things just kind of numbed it out. But that's not healthy for many reasons. And eventually, thankfully, I figured that out and it got onto this sober journey. And I'm so grateful that as part of my journey, I've been able to, like, know more emotions than just like happy, sad, and mad. Like, there's a whole giant lovely spectrum of emotions, and some of them are comfortable, like joy and awe, and some of them are hard to feel, like grief and despair. But they all make up what I am, which is a human, and I don't want to miss any of them.
Mm.
So being able to name an emotion and sit with an uncomfortable emotion like grief, anxiety, and not shoo it away, not stuff it, not pretend it's not there, but to be able to name it, identify it, and be curious about, like, why are you here? What information are you trying to share with me, and how is it helpful, or how can I be helpful with that feeling? And I'm just curious, because of that background in me, is that what you kind of help people do, is try to break down that taboo of, let's talk about the hard stuff, let's find safe places to explore those feelings that maybe you were taught to not talk about, but that's let's talk about it, let's talk about these things that are hard and that are uncomfortable and hurt.
Hmm.
Is that kind of what you do, or if
Yeah,
not, tell me what you do?
yeah, yeah. Well, I just want to reflect that, like, I'm just really appreciating your own journey, and like how much it sounds like yeah, I love the way you spoke of like getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I think I have that line somewhere on my website. Like creating comfortable spaces to get uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so to me, I guess, like, I'm such a big picture Aquarian weirdo that, like, I take it from an even sort of bigger place where it's like,
Okay.
why is this uncomfortable? Like, can we look at that layer? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because, like, who taught us that grieving is inherently uncomfortable?
Right,
Now, I'm not suggesting it's not. In fact, it's like it can be really fucking brutal.
right.
But, like, yeah, like even just this idea that it's like, well, now we need to get uncomfortable. It's like, actually, some of my favorite moments in this life and my most like comforting or comforted moments is when I'm like, oh, you share humanity with me. Oh,
Yes,
we're feeling this similar thread.
yes,
Or wow, I never felt the way you did, but I'm learning so much from what you are experiencing. Like, and actually, like, can we see how comforting and thus comfortable that can be?
yes.
Um, so that sometimes is like part of it. But then, sometimes, of course, like workplaces and planning processes, I think it can feel like a liability to get in the feels or to, this
Sure.
isn't therapy, this is work. And so I do want to be clear that it's like, I have held processing spaces where we really just talk about the grief that's in the room. But this also can look very applied. And, it's also totally appropriate for colleagues to like not share every detail of their personal lives with each other. We don't have to do that either.
Yeah.
But it's more about like, especially, and this is why primarily I do this in the climate arena, but I've done this elsewhere too, but it's like loss is inevitable. And what are we doing with that? Are we acknowledging it when it arises? Do we have a process for how it works? When someone needs extra time and space because of that loss, do we have mechanisms for that where we support each other in that way? Again, this is like, I think how it ties back to my college experience, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Versus I feel like what our status quo so often is we just, no, we're not going to talk about it. Shove it under the rug.
Yep. Hide it and march on.
Right. And then guess what? It's not going anywhere.
Right.
And so, I think sometimes resistance I get to this work is they're like, well, we don't want to open up a can of worms. Because if we start letting people feel sad and angry and really, then they're,
start letting people be human.
Right. And I was just having a meeting with someone earlier where we were talking about this. And I said to her, I was like, the worms are already here. Like the aluminum can between you and the worms is very flimsy. Like they're already worms. So what do we want to do with that? Like, and actually, the best thing to do is like get in touch with the worms, free the worms, like let them go. So I think, a lot of times it's just another piece of this that I think is important. This sounds like a sidebar, but it feels really related.
Yeah,
is
please
that,
tell me.
When I work on grief and loss with workplaces and teams and communities or in planning processes, I'm not just talking about death. Death is a huge, and that's part of what I think I offer in these kinds of, you described like, what's a workshop look like? And so we talk about how, of course, death and bereavement is a major loss that makes a huge impact on our lives. And it is so not the only loss that requires grieving. And really, just the definition I use for grieving is just this natural, necessary, psychological, and somatic, embodied process for how we repair and reconnect after loss. Because loss, going through a loss, and this is like very, proven in the neuroscience and trauma world, like loss creates a rupture.
Yeah.
So when we experience major loss, like our inner working system experiences this disconnect. Which is why, like, when we experience the death of a loved one, or we get, last week was the election, and for many of us, that was a very upsetting, shocking, hard to deal with event. Clearly for other people, it was not. But like, I will just name that last Wednesday, like, I definitely did not have the ability to work very well. I lost my sense of appetite. And I really didn't have a good sense of what time it was that day.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens.
That's your rupture,
it's literally like and so expecting our workforce or like things to just keep going in motion when that rupture happens is cruel. And it's faulty to kind of, think that that's possible anyway. And so grieving is just this mechanism that helps us reestablish connection with ourselves, with others, and move forward in this kind of, resilient way, rather than that rupture just becoming permanent. And that permanent rupture is trauma.
Yes. Yeah. Let me play off something that you just said, this idea that grief doesn't have to necessarily be about death, that it's this loss. And I In the article, the NRDC article that I kind of discovered you in, they talk about a 2017 American Psychological Association definition of eco anxiety, and that's described as a chronic fear of environmental doom that can affect well-being through the loss of social identity and cohesion, hostility, violence, and interpersonal and intergroup aggression. So I think that kind of gets to what you're talking about. It's not necessarily death that is all that grief is about. It is this loss. And in the realm of eco anxiety, it's, I feel, if a species, I just had this week a show was about the monarch butterflies, and there's certainly people that are worried about that creature maybe not being with us, because of climate change and its habitat being damaged or destroyed or not available for it in its life cycle. So is the monarch butterfly going to remain a species with us or not? And there's loss around that for those who may care about that species. So it seems to me you're tying your work into not just death, but in the realm of climate anxiety or eco anxiety. It's helping people grieve those things that they may be losing because of climate change. And am I articulating that accurately?
100%. So I actually just 2 months ago got to do an event at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, which is one of my favorite places anyway. Just such an amazing intersection of kind of like public space and parkland and nature and also death and grief honoring. And they do amazing arts and culture program. And so they brought me in for NYC Climate Week to do an event on memorializing ecological loss.
Yeah.
And it was such an interesting both conversation with some panelists I so grateful to bring together, with then this really fun kind of group activity where we were all designing kind of memorials and monuments and almost imagining like, what would a planetary cemetery look like to us? Right. And so that even is just an example of, right, like there are so many different kinds of losses, but in the sense of, climate change, we are, to me, eco anxiety is a kind of anticipatory grief.
Sure.
So if we have a strong belief that a major loss is going to happen or that we are going to experience, we will start grieving. Not intentionally, but just the body and the mind will start doing that.
Sure.
And so, I think, and then when unattended to, of course, it can look, not like, like very difficult kinds of, and sometimes not very loving, and sometimes even potentially harmful kinds of experiences. But yeah, it's, I think, so like, how do we address eco anxiety, to me, is kind of grieving is necessary in how we address eco anxiety. Again, if we just are like, don't feel that, well, then it's not going anywhere.
Right.
And there's kind of this, not to make a false binary, but there's kind of a twofold path of like, it can help spur us to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make our, to actually like address climate change. And the reality is that climate change is happening, and there is going to be species loss, and there is going to be habitat loss.
Yeah, there is species loss happening already. Right.
And so rather than, then like we need some kind of grieving processes for that. That's why I loved this idea of like the planetary cemetery, right? Like how are we going to grieve the species that no longer is, or even the place you used to go as a kid that no longer looks like how it used to look like when you were growing up.
Right.
Or a place that people you knew lived that now is like too threatened by sea level rise to be able to kind of hold human dwellings, So like, and I think there's so much that traditional ecological knowledge and First Nations and Indigenous leaders can teach us on this. I think there's amazing voices like from Joanna Macy's work I love Robin Wall Kimmerer and Braiding Sweetgrass. Like there are these amazing people who are really thinking about that sort of like, how do we be in right relationship with landscapes, habitats, species, and even humans that are changing all the time. And I think, yeah, again, like grieving doesn't mean that the loss goes away, but it does mean we have some kind of process for reconnecting.
Reconnecting, right? That's where the how do we adapt, and how do we strengthen our resiliency by acknowledging and honoring the grieving process, because we may not get back the things that we lost. So how do we, honor each other's sorrow, if you will, and then adapt and move forward and make better choices, healthier choices, and demonstrate resiliency. So I think that's what I'm getting out of your work as well. That's so powerful. It's not just simply, as I understand it, let's just focus on the grief, but it's this bigger picture of we have to focus on the grief so we can then adapt as we move forward. And I love the reconnection part that you're talking about, because that's being disconnected from ourselves, from a community, from our larger community, our world. That's going to lead us nowhere more positive. So we need those connections. So I think I'm seeing the bigger picture of your work of honoring grief so that we can adapt to reconnect and move forward in a resilient manner. Is that kind of the process that you're describing?
Yeah, because I think to me, like grief is an emotion and experience, but to me, grieving is a vehicle.
Sure.
Like grieving is it's a process. It's almost like, and I almost want to almost push back on it being an emotion. It's to me like I'm grieving is akin to saying like I'm pregnant or I'm aging. It's like it is an active process of becoming.
Yeah, I like that.
And of course, I think especially akin to aging, like aging is not something a lot of us want to become or do. It's hard, it's scary, it's vulnerable, and it's inevitable, and there's no escaping it. And it's really obvious when a lot of people in our world try to not do it. And, I think that often creates a lot more suffering. And
Right, right.
so similarly, it's like, right, like we're grieving it's here anyway. Um, and I think it is this just right. It's this in really powerful process to kind of just bring us back online, back in connection together again, trusting each other more, with our hearts, with our whole selves. And I think for me, this is why, like, I do believe in the public sector. I do believe in government. I'm like, some of my friends are more anarchist than I am, and I we have a lot of shitty systems that are totally because they were designed
that way. Sure.
with oppression baked in.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also always going to be systems like, and I'm really grateful that I get organic produce on my table, and I'm grateful that my lights turn on, and I'm grateful that I flush the toilet and it goes somewhere, like,
Right.
and I would adapt if I didn't have those things. But like, I think what really concerns me though is just seeing, and this is why it was so great to partner with NRDC and do some workshops with their staff, is that like folks that are working on climate policy and on climate issues desperately need to be able to talk about and feel into this and support each other through this.
Yeah.
Because what so often happens is just, it's like, again, it's like we don't really talk about feelings in the workplace, no, but then they're looking at horrifically distressing data.
Yeah.
They're hearing about or on the front lines of, disasters and, major climate emergencies. And then, if there's no process and there's no sort of workplace community around those experiences, then like of course they're not going to serve communities very well if
Right.
they themselves can't really be in their own process of processing grief.
Right. Or they'll get to the point of overwhelm or burnout, which in either scenario requires you to shut down and stop doing it because, you know, there just comes a point where you just can't keep pretending you don't have feelings. So,
Yeah, or that like loss is here. And again, I think like I never want to make light of loss, and I never want to make light of injustice. But I also firmly believe that we need to and deserve to approach this from a playful, curious
sure.
place, and actually see, again, it's like I I take great comfort in grieving. It's like how and this is why from the very sort of beginning, it's like it's not like I'm so obsessed with death. It's just that I want to get into the real stuff with you, you
Right.
know?
Right.
Like I want to really know, like, why did you wake up this morning and what keeps you going? And clearly this is exactly what you want to know too. It's why it's so cool that you bring all of us in to like share our stories that sustain us. And I think this is how we do that.
Yeah.
So it can feel good. It doesn't have to just be this like dark, horrible, shitty thing. I think
Right.
actually it can feel very good.
I think that's the power of paradox, right? I can acknowledge this hurts and it's hard and it's beautiful and wonderful at the same time. I mean, some of the most amazing conversations I've ever had with people is when we've developed that trusting relationship over time that we can be truly vulnerable with each other and say, these are the things that are really hurting me or that I'm grieving or that I'm afraid of or whatever that uncomfortable feeling may be. But because I have an outlet for that with someone that I trust in a safe space to talk about those things, it's so amazing and so beautiful and so powerful to have those conversations about real things. And I love it. I could keep talking with you for hours, Ari. I'm loving this conversation, but I also want to be respectful of your time, and we're getting pretty close to an hour, and I want to make sure I give you a chance to do a call to action now that hopefully folks who've listened to this or watching it feel inspired and moved and want to do something. So what can people do? What's your call to action for folks?
Yeah. So, like we got to be in this together. And I think for anyone who's feeling like really misunderstood in their workplace or like they're holding all these feelings that just don't seem to be sort of visibilized, I just you're not alone. And like the fact that we're aware of this to me is a good sign. It's a good sign that we're having this conversation. So I would say, some call to actions are on a couple of different arenas. There's like, if you want to get sort of playful and curious about grieving, I am just loving this. Now it's been over a year that my collaborator Kuan Yin and I have been doing grief school. It's just this like really sweet special space. We kind of do these 6-week cohorts, and just to really be better grief guides for ourselves and others. It's a really loving, mostly online, though we've been kind of popping up. We popped up in New York City this summer and hopefully doing another in-person one in a few months. And then also like be that person who brings this up at work. And if you need support in that or some talking points in that, you can just literally reach out to me. And there's a lot of us out there who can sort of support folks in that. And I think we also just have to really get our hands in the dirt. And like hug a tree and take note of the birds and just like remember that we are just little beings in this big planet, and this planet is going to outlive us. And that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, but it also can sort of be a place of comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I get out and hike every chance I get. So I couldn't agree more with your get outside and put your feet in the grass or hug a tree or just take a hike, ride a bike, just do something to be outside whenever you can. It's such a powerful thing. Ari, what's your website? I want to make sure people know how to get in touch with you as well. We'll put it in the show notes as well. But just while I got you and people are listening and watching, why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you?
Yep. You can learn more about my practice and all the weird, wonderful things I do around grief and climate and facilitation and coaching at ari.fyi. So it's ari.fyi.
Perfect. Well, we'll get that on the show notes as well for folks to follow up with you. All right, so I got 3 questions. We've been talking. I love your description about how this uncomfortable thing doesn't have to be uncomfortable. So I appreciate that. So I'm going to say we've been talking about some things that are not uncomfortable, but some folks might think they are. And I always like to end the discussions talking a little bit about hope. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions about hope, and using kind of the clinical understanding of hope being you can have a vision for a better future. There's a plan, there's steps to take to effectuate that future, and you feel you have a sense of agency that you can do something about it. You might not get there, you might not be successful, there might be failures along the way, definitely might be hard, but there's a vision, a plan, and you feel a sense of agency around it. So I'm just going to ask you 3 quick questions about what you're hopeful for. So just kind of don't spend too much time thinking about the answer. Just give your first kind of inclination of what you think. So the first question for you, Ari, is what is your vision for a better future? And it can be for you personally, professionally, or for the world.
My vision for a better future consists of one where we just find a way more loving way to do everything, period. And where we can, grieve together, honor things together, memorialize together, learn from each other, and just really commit to seeing that when we there's always going to be stuff, there's always going to be disagreement, but I really think we can do this life in a less harmful way, and so just realizing that we can just love each other and do our very best to cause as little harm as possible, I think is that's my prayer, hope.
Nice. See, you touched on this a little bit in your answer, but just as a follow-up to give you a little bit more space to explain, tell me why that's your vision.
My Zen Buddhist teachers really come to mind on this, and who really, I'm so grateful for this framework to really look at the oneness of all things.
Yeah.
And that there is no separateness. And so much of what makes us suffer is this idea that you're you, I'm me, I'm not your stuff, you're not my stuff, them, those people there, that country, that, and just it's literally killing us. And so I think just, how do we not, I want to see a world that finds its ways to navigate and move past suffering.
All right. Last question. Imagine we're there. Imagine the future that you just described exists today. How does that make you feel?
I mean, the problem is it's delusional. Because there's always going to be suffering. But what do we do with it?
That is a Buddhist.
I know. Leaving you with such a of course the grief
it's
seems
beautiful.
Suffering either way, but it's I think even if we're all aware that just like, okay, like suffering either way, and we still are going to do our best to end suffering, that leaves me just kind of laughing and with a smile and with this like, oh, what a messy, weird, beautiful life this is.
Love it. Love it. That's very hopeful. Laughter is smiling is even amongst suffering. That's beautiful. That's
Mm.
beautiful. Well, Ari, thank you so much for joining me. I really am grateful for your time. I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing and the way you're trying to help make the world a better place. It's so important. I appreciate all that you're doing and everything you've said. So I'll leave you with the last word. So thank you for your time today, Ari.
Thank you, Steven. And thank you, everybody listening. And yeah, we can do this.
Perfect way to end. Thanks, Ari. Bye. What an incredible conversation with Ari Simon. I'm so grateful for this conversation with Ari and thank them for their time, expertise, and compassionate work. Ari's journey from New Jersey to California, shaped by pivotal events like 9/11 and the personal losses they endured, offers a profound look at how grief and resilience can transform not just our individual lives, but entire communities. Through their work in climate justice and creation of Grief at Work, Ari has shown us the importance of addressing grief openly, whether it's the loss of loved ones or the environmental losses we face due to climate change. Their insights on eco-anxiety, community engagement, and the power of grieving together remind us that even in the face of loss, there's an opportunity for connection, growth, and healing. Ari's message about breaking the taboo around grief and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue is one we can all take to heart. It's a call to honor our shared humanity and to build a more compassionate and understanding society. You know, I mentioned in the discussion with Ari my own personal journey, or at least parts of it, in coming to get to a place where I've learned how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, learning how to be a human, like how to acknowledge that I have emotions, identify what they are, and be curious about them and what they can tell me and how they can help shape my choices and my decisions. I, in my past, was someone who certainly identified with this idea that humans are rational and we occasionally have emotions that get in the way. I have done a 180 on that, and I've come to understand that, in essence, humans are these emotional beings that occasionally have rational thought. So, learning how to name and identify the whole wide array of emotional experiences that I can have as a human, and learning how to develop and cultivate relationships and safe spaces to speak with others, friends, families, therapists, as the case may be, but to be able to just identify, name, and talk about my emotional experiences, even the ones that are difficult or hard, has really led to this beautiful life that I get to live today, and really led to me making better choices about how I can take care of myself and others in a kind and compassionate and loving way. So I really appreciated Ari's perspective on grief and loss in their reframing of grief, kind of breaking that taboo that, oh, it's something that we shouldn't talk about and it's something that should kind of be hidden in the dark. And Ari's perspective that no, and in fact, we should talk about grief and loss in safe spaces, of course, with people that are, trustworthy of that depth of a conversation and that vulnerability. But in having those conversations, those real conversations that might be hard and difficult and painful, I really appreciate Ari's reframing of that. Just let's stop describing that as something that is, bad, and let's call it what it is. This is a part of being human, and it's an important part of being human. And it is a way to develop and strengthen our resilience as humans, to go forward and make better choices and honor our shared humanity, honor our own personal humanity, and in doing that with others, connecting with others. I love that idea that he shared, that they shared, about trauma and grief and loss being this disconnection. And by coming together and sharing our stories and talking about our grief and loss with others, that brings us back together, that creates that connection. And we all need that connection, right? Humans are social creatures. We need to be connected to other people. So if we're not honoring grief and loss and some of those other emotions that might be difficult to face, we're not fully connecting with each other. And we need that, I think, in order to move forward and develop more sustainable, healthy ways to live together on this planet, the only place we can call home. So with that, again, I want to thank Ari for sharing their story and wisdom with us today. Ari's journey and work inspires me to approach grief with courage and to transform it into a force for positive change. To the audience, to my audience, to those of you listening and watching, thank you for joining me and Ari on this emotional and enlightening episode. I hope, like me, you were inspired by this conversation and will continue your journey bringing positive change to your community. If Ari's story resonated with you, please, I encourage you to share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. And please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. You know it, I really love all the support I've been getting for Stories Sustain Us. And with that, I started this show earlier this year, not really knowing what to expect, and with a personal goal of getting to 20 episodes. And today's discussion with Ari is episode number 20. So this is a bit of a milestone for me and the show. I'm grateful for each of the guests I've had the privilege to speak with during this first season of Stories Sustain Us, and I'm grateful for each of you for coming along on this ride with me. I've really been enjoying it. I hope you have been too. So as we approach the holiday season, I'm going to reshare a few of the top episodes from season 1 of Stories Sustain Us while I start gearing up to kick off season 2 in January. I already have some great interviews lined up, and I'm excited to share some more inspiring sustainability stories with you. So next week on November 26th, I will reshare Stories Sustain Us episode number 13, The Importance of Awareness and Support for HIV/AIDS, with guest Roy Hudgens. This will be available at storysustainus.com, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on YouTube. And as always, let's keep working together to create a more sustainable, compassionate future for all. Until next time, I'm Steven Shower. Please take care of yourself and each other. Take care.